Adelaide had poured Mrs. Blackwood's tea for 2 years. She knew the exact turn of the wrist the old woman liked, the half-spoon of honey, the way the cup had to be set just under her right hand where her failing eyes could still find it. 2 years. And on the night of the Michaelmas dinner, a footman lifted her place card from beside the mistress of the house and carried it down, past the silver, past the candlesticks, past every face she had learned by name, and set it below the salt. The servant's end. She saw him do it. She did not flinch. She walked to where she had been put, and she sat. Then Julian rose. He had a glass in his hand and 30 guests to hear him, and he wanted them all to hear. We do not seat fortune hunters among family, Miss Gray. He let the name curdle in his mouth. Gather your things by morning. And Lady Carraway, at the far end, smiled over the rim of her wine like a woman watching a card she had dealt herself. That night, Adelaide did not weep. She did not pack. She lit one candle in a cold room and wrote a single letter to a man she had not spoken to in 3 years. If you have ever been judged by people who never once asked who you truly are, never asked one honest question, only decided, then sit with me a while. This story is for you. Before I go on, do this one small thing. Subscribe so the whole of it reaches you and not just the piece the wind carries. And comment the town you're watching from. I want to see how far Adelaide's story travels tonight. Tell me your city. Then come back and let me tell you the rest of it, from the beginning, the way it truly happened. Because it did not begin at that table. It began quietly, the way most of the true things do. I will tell it as I remember it now, from a place of peace I did not have then. That matters. A story told in the middle of the wound comes out all blood and no shape. But I am old enough now, and far enough from it, that I can lay the pieces down gently and let you see how each one fit. Wraycombe Hall sat in a fold of the Somerset hills, near the little town of Nettleford, where the road ran between hedges so old the farmers had forgotten who planted them. It was not a grand house. It had been grand once, in the way of houses that outlive the money that built them, and now it wore its age with a kind of tired grace, good stone, a leaking gutter over the east window, a physic garden gone half to seed that I loved more than any tended lawn in the county. I had come there to be a companion to Mrs. Honoria Blackwood. She was 71 that year, a widow, and going blind by degrees so slow she could pretend she wasn't. Cataracts, the doctor said, though he said it the way men say a thing they cannot fix. Her world had narrowed to shapes and light and the voices of the people near her. And into that narrowing world I read. That was my work. I read her the newspaper each morning, and her letters, and the novels she loved and pretended to find silly. I walked her through the physic garden and named the plants for her, the feverfew, the rue, the lavender going grey, because she liked to know they were still there even when she could no longer see them. She paid me a wage. She tried to pay me more than the wage, more than once, and each time I refused it, and each time it became a small quarrel we both enjoyed. You are the only servant in England, she told me once, who argues me down when I try to give her money. I am not a servant, I said. I am a companion. There is a difference, and you know it, because you wrote it in the advertisement yourself. She laughed at that. She had a good laugh, low and surprised, as if it caught her off guard every time. I was fond of her. I want you to understand that plainly, before all the rest of it comes. I did not stay at Wraycombe for the wage. I stayed because a half-blind old woman had come to trust my voice in a house full of people who only wanted to know when she would die, and I could not bring myself to leave her to them. I went by Gray there. Miss Gray. It was my mother's name before she married, her maiden name, plain as a stone wall, and I had taken it up and worn it like a plain grey cloak that let me pass unremarked. Nobody at Wraycombe asked me much about it. A companion is not expected to have a past. She is furniture that speaks, useful and unexamined, and for a long while that suited me exactly. I will tell you now the thing I told no one there, because you have come this far and you should have it. I took the name 3 years before I ever saw Nettleford. I took it after a quarrel, the kind of quarrel that does not end, that simply stops, and leaves two people living on opposite sides of a silence they are both too proud to cross. I will not lay the whole of it out yet. I will only say that I had wanted, more than I had ever wanted anything, to stand in one single place in England where I was engaged for what I could do, and not for whose daughter I was. Where a person looked at me and saw a woman who could read well and keep accounts and hold her tongue, and not a rank, not a name, not a door I might open for them if they were pleasant to me. Wraycombe was that place. For 2 years it was exactly that place. I had earned my keep with my own 2 hands and my own steady voice, and no one there owed me a thing but wages, and no one there flattered me for anything but the reading. Do you know how rare that is, to be wanted for the plain work you do? I had my mother's ring on my finger, a small garnet in an old mourning setting, dark red, nothing fine, and when I was uneasy I would turn it round and round with my thumb, and it steadied me. It was the one thing I had kept from before, the one thing I would not give up. I did not know in those 2 good years that the quiet was about to end. But it was. It arrived in a hired trap on a wet Tuesday, and it was wearing a very good coat, and it was called Julian. Julian Blackwood was Mrs. Blackwood's nephew, her late husband's brother's son, which made him near enough to blood to claim the house, and far enough from it to have no real love for the woman who lived in it. He was 34. He was handsome in the way that men are handsome when they have never once been told no. He arrived, he said, to help his dear aunt settle her affairs. He said dear aunt the way Julian said everything, with a small performance behind it, as if the words were props he was holding up for an audience he suspected of not quite believing him. He was in the house a week before he cornered me. I was in the library. It was the one room at Wraycombe I loved as much as the garden, long, low, smelling of old paper and wood smoke, with a window seat where the light came through green in summer. I was there alone, shelving the books Mrs. Blackwood could no longer read, when he came in and shut the door behind him. That was the first thing. He shut the door. "Miss Gray," he said, "you've made yourself very comfortable here." "I've made myself useful," I said. "It's a different thing." He smiled and ran a finger along the mantel and looked at the dust that came off it, as if the dust were mine, as if I had failed at something. "My aunt is fond of you. She talks of you a great deal, almost as if you were family." He turned. "You're not family?" "No," I said. "I'm aware of what I am. Are you?" He came a little nearer. He was not a large man, but he used what he had, standing too close, letting the room feel smaller. "Then let me be plain with you, because I think plain talk is best between people who understand each other. My aunt is old. She is not well. She has a great deal of money and very little sense left about who deserves it. And a clever girl, a clever, patient girl, who reads to a lonely old woman and walks her in the garden and refuses her wages so prettily, a clever girl could do very well out of a situation like this. Very well indeed." He tilted his head. If she were the sort of girl who thought that way. I said nothing. I want you to notice that. It is the thread that runs through the whole of what happened. When a small man threatens you, the pride in you wants to answer him. It wants to say something that will cut him down to his size. And every time the moment came, I said nothing. Because I believed, God help me, I truly believed that silence was the dignified answer, that a woman who did not stoop to defend herself against filth could not be dirtied by it. I thought my silence was strength. I learned, slowly and at great cost, that to a certain kind of man your silence is simply room. Room to build whatever he likes and call it your character." Julian looked at me a moment longer, and when he saw I would not rise to it, something in his face settled, satisfied, almost as if my quiet had told him what he wanted to know. That I would not fight, that I was, as far as he could see, alone. "I'm glad we understand each other," he said, though we did not, and he left, and left the door open behind him this time. And I stood in the green light and turned my mother's ring round and round my finger until my hand was still. A few days after that came the matter of the will, and I will tell it to you carefully, because it is where the trap I could not yet see was truly laid. Mr. Alcott came out from Nettleford. He was the family solicitor, 60, dry, precise. A man who had handled Blackwood affairs since before I was born, and who plainly disapproved of Julian in a manner too well-mannered to speak aloud. Mrs. Blackwood wished to hear her will read over. She did this sometimes. It comforted her, I think, to be reminded that her wishes still existed in writing, even as the writing itself blurred past her reading. Alcott read it to her in the morning-room, slowly, and I sat by the window with my sewing because she liked me near, and Julian happened to be just outside the open door, arranging flowers he had no interest in, listening to every word. The estate, Alcott read, stood at some £40,000. Against it lay a mortgage of £3,000 on the hall itself, taken years back and never troubling anyone. The bequests were small and sensible, sums to the church, to old servants, to a cousin in Bath. The residue, the great bulk of it, went to Julian, as the nearest blood. That was the will as it stood. And then Mrs. Blackwood, half to herself, in that soft failing voice, said the thing that I believe sealed everything that followed. "I should like," she said, "before I go, to see that Adelaide never wants. She has been better to me than my own." She reached out and found my hand without seeing it. "I must speak to you about that, Mr. Alcott, something for Miss Gray. She'll refuse it, mind, she refuses everything. But I should like it set down so she can't." I told her, gently, that she needn't, that I wanted nothing, and I meant it, and she patted my hand and said, "There, you see." She refuses everything, and she was pleased, and Alcott made a careful note, and it was to her a small warm moment in a long grey morning. To Julian, standing in the doorway with a flower in his hand, it was a knife held to his throat. Because here is the peace none of us knew that morning, the peace I only learned the shape of much later. Julian Blackwood was ruined. Not embarrassed. Not short. Ruined, he owed £5,000 to a moneylender in Bristol, a gambling debt, run up over a bad season and a worse temper, and the man had given him 60 days to find it, and after 60 days the man's methods were not the sort that stopped at letters. £40,000 was coming to Julian, yes, but it was coming when his aunt died, and his aunt, blind and frail as she was, showed every sign of living a good while yet, and a live aunt who was now talking, in front of the solicitor, about carving pieces off the estate for her companion. That was a woman who might live long enough to give the whole thing away by inches, while a Bristol moneylender counted down his 60 days. He needed her money soon. He needed all of it. And he needed the one person she trusted, the one clear pair of eyes in that house, out of it before he took what he meant to take. I did not know any of that yet. I only knew that after the will was read, Julian's manner toward me changed. He stopped threatening me in libraries. He grew, instead, pleasant, and a pleasant Julian was far more frightening than a rude one, only I was too proud to be frightened. He began to be seen with Lady Carraway. Lady Prudence Carraway was the great lady of that corner of Somerset, or believed herself to be, which in society amounts to nearly the same thing. She was 49 and handsome and hard, and she had a daughter of marriageable age and a very clear view of the world, which was that rank was a thing you could see, the way you could see the cut of a coat, and that anyone worth knowing announced themselves plainly by their blood. She had a daughter to settle, and a nephew heir newly arrived with £40,000 behind him, and she did the arithmetic that women like her have done since the beginning of the world. And Julian, I think, whispered in her ear. I cannot prove it, but I felt the shape of it soon enough. He gave her a thing to do, a role to play, the part she was born to play, and she took it up with relish. She became the general of a war I did not know had been declared. The first shot was fired at the county assembly. It was a small affair, as these things went, the assembly rooms at Nettleford, a hired band, the local families in their good clothes. Mrs. Blackwood liked to go and sit and listen to the music and be greeted, and I went with her, at her side, as I always was. I did not dance. I stood by her chair and named for her the people who came and went, a quiet running commentary at her ear, which she enjoyed more than the music. Lady Carraway crossed the room to us. She came with 2 other ladies in her wake, the way she always moved, and she greeted Mrs. Blackwood warmly, and then she turned to me with a smile that had a great deal of teeth in it. "Miss Gray," she said, and she said it loudly enough that the little cluster of people near us turned to listen, which was exactly her intent. "I have been so curious about you. We all have. You keep yourself such a mystery. Do tell us, which family are you?" "A great one, I'm sure. One always knows breeding when one sees it. A pause, sweet as sugar over glass. So which is it? Where do the Greys spring from?" And there it was. The trap, so simple I nearly admired it. If I named a great family, I could be caught out, checked, disproved, exposed as a liar, for the name Grey belonged to no great family and never had. And if I named nothing, I would seem to be hiding something, and a woman who hides her origins in a room full of people who worship origins has already, in their eyes, confessed. I could have ended it in a sentence. I had a sentence in my mouth that would have ended the whole game before it began. My father's name, his office, the plain fact of who I was. One sentence and Lady Carraway would have gone white and small and apologized for a week. I did not say it. Partly it was pride. I had come here to be nothing but myself, and I would not now buy my safety with the very name I had fled. And partly, and this is the harder thing to admit, partly it was contempt. I looked at this woman making a spectacle of me for sport, and I thought, I will not hand you what you want. I will not perform my pedigree for you like a dog doing tricks. If you want to know who I am, ask me honestly, ask me kindly, and I might tell you. But I will not be interrogated into it. So I said, quietly, a country family. Nothing you would know, and the room read it exactly as she'd designed it to be read. Evasion, concealment, guilt, I saw it move across their faces like a shadow crossing a field, the small satisfied settling of people who have just decided they were right about you all along. One of the ladies in her train, a thin one with a long nose, leaned to another and murmured, not quite low enough, and look at the ring. Garnet. Paste. More like paste, like her pedigree, and she laughed, a little laugh behind a fan, and the other laughed too. I had my mother's ring on my hand, my mother, who had died when I was 9, whose face I could barely hold in my mind any more, but whose ring I had worn every day since I was old enough for it not to slip off. Paste, like her pedigree. I felt my thumb move to it, that old habit, turning it once against my palm. And I stood there, and I named the next arriving family for Mrs. Blackwood at her ear, as if nothing had happened, because I would not give them my face either. But something had happened. I knew it walking home in the dark of the carriage, Mrs. Blackwood dozing against my shoulder. A thing had been set loose in that room, and it would not go back in its box. They had a story about me now. Fortune hunter. Mystery girl. No family, or a shameful one, clever and patient and refusing her wages so prettily. Julian had built the frame, and Lady Carraway had hung the picture, and the whole county was standing in front of it now, nodding. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself I knew who I was, and that was enough, and let them think, what they liked. Oh, I was so certain of that. I was so armoured in my own good opinion of myself. I did not yet understand that a reputation is not a thing you own. It is a thing the room owns, and they were painting mine, and I had decided, out of pride, not to hold the brush. The last straw came at Michaelmas. You have already seen the end of that scene. I gave it to you at the start, the way I have carried it ever since, the place card and Julian rising and the word he threw. But let me set it whole for you now, because you should stand in that room the way I stood in it. The Michaelmas dinner at Wraycombe was the old woman's great yearly pleasure. 30 guests, the whole neighbourhood, the Carraways, the county people, the vicar, all of them at the long table under the candles. Mrs. Blackwood had planned it for weeks, as much as she could plan anything now, and I had done the rest. The seating and the flowers and the 100 small arrangements, because she could no longer see to do them, and trusted me to be her eyes. I had set my own place, as I did every year, at her right hand, so I could help her, cut what needed cutting, guide her hand to her glass, name the dishes as they came. We came in to dinner, and when we reached the table my card was not at her right hand. I saw it at once, the small white card with my name in my own writing, lifted and carried down, all the long way down, past the family and the guests and the good silver, to the very foot of the table, below the salt cellar. Below the salt. There is an old meaning in that place, older than any of us, and everyone at that table knew it in their bones. Above the salt sat the family and the honoured. Below it sat the poor relations and the upper servants. My card had been moved while I helped an old blind woman find her chair, and it had been moved by someone who wanted every guest to see exactly where I now belonged. I settled Mrs. Blackwood. I made sure her hand found her glass. And then I walked down the length of that table, past 30 pairs of eyes, to the place I had been assigned, and I sat in it without a word. I would not give them the scene. I would not. But Julian wanted the scene, and Julian had the floor. He stood halfway through the soup, and he tapped his glass, and the table fell quiet in that eager way a table does when it senses blood. "Friends," he said, "I must say something that grieves me. It grieves me deeply. It did not grieve him at all. He was enjoying it the way a boy enjoys a bonfire. You all know my aunt. You know her generous heart, and you know that a generous heart, when it grows old, when the eyes grow dim, is prey to those who would use it." He turned, and he looked at me down the whole length of the table, and every head turned with his. "We do not seat fortune hunters among family, Miss Gray. I have made inquiries. I know what you are. My aunt's affection has been worked upon by a woman with no name she'll speak and no family she'll own, and I will not stand by and watch this house robbed by kindness. Gather your things by morning. You'll not spend another week under this roof." Silence, 30 faces. And down the table, near Julian, Lady Carraway lifted her wine and smiled into it, small and warm and satisfied, a woman watching her plan bloom exactly on schedule. And Mrs. Blackwood, my Honoria, half-blind, bewildered, turning her poor clouded eyes from voice to voice, catching only that something dreadful was being done, and not able to see what, began to say, "Julian, what? Adelaide? What is he saying?" And reached out her hand for me, and I was too far down the table now to take it, and before she could gather herself, before she could rise to my defence as I know in my heart she would have, 2 of them were at her side, Julian's people, murmuring that she was tired, that she was overwrought, that she must come away and rest, and they lifted her gently, so gently, and steered her from the room while she was still asking what was happening. They took her away so she could not speak for me. That was the cruelest stroke of all, and the cleverest. They did not silence the old woman with a hand over her mouth. They silenced her with concern. I sat below the salt in a room full of people who had eaten at tables I set, and I looked at 30 faces deciding, in comfort, over soup, that I was exactly what Julian said. And I rose, and I laid my napkin by my plate, and I left the table without one word, and I walked up the stairs to my small cold room at the top of the house. Now, here is where the story turns, and here is where I was nearly too proud to let it. I did not weep. I want you to know I did not give them that either, not that night. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, and I turned my mother's ring round and round, and the whole hot weight of it pressed on me. The injustice, the false face of it, the ease with which 30 people I had served had believed a lie because it was a prettier story than the truth. And the pride in me, the old iron pride I had from my father and never could put down, said, "Leave. Leave in the morning with your head high and let them choke on their lie. Do not defend yourself. To answer a slander is to admit it might be true. Pack and go and never think of them again." I very nearly did. I had my trunk half out from under the bed. And then I stopped, because through everything, through the pride and the hurt and the roar of my own heart, a small cold thought came, and it was this: it was too neat, it was too well built. A man does not stand up before 30 guests and stake his whole standing on driving out a paid companion unless that companion is standing in the way of something. Julian had not moved against me because I annoyed him. He had moved against me because I was a witness, the only clear-eyed witness in a house where the mistress could no longer see. But a witness? To what? And once I asked that question, I could not stop seeing. I thought back over the last weeks, and now, with the pride knocked out of me, I saw the things pride had let me pass over. Julian at his aunt's bedside more than he had ever been. Julian sending me on errands that took me from the house at odd hours. And one thing above all, I had seen it 3 days before and thought nothing of it. I had come to Mrs. Blackwood's room in the evening to read to her, and Julian had been there, at the bedside, in the poor light of a single candle, and he had a small paper laid on the coverlet, and he was guiding her hand, her failing, uncertain hand, across the bottom of it with a pen. "Just here, Aunt," he'd been saying, "so soft, so kind. Just your name, here, where my finger is. It's nothing, a small matter of business." There, and she, who could not see the paper, who trusted blood, had made her mark where his finger pressed, and he had blotted it and folded it away into his coat, and smiled at me over her head and said the light was too poor for reading tonight. Perhaps I'd come back tomorrow. I had thought nothing of it. A small matter of business. Why would I think anything? I was too proud to be suspicious. Suspicion felt beneath me, and that pride had nearly walked me out the door and left an old blind woman alone in a house with the man who was guiding her hand across papers in the dark. I did not pack. I put the trunk back. And I waited until the house was asleep, and then I went, in my stocking feet, with a candle shaded by my hand, down to the room Julian used as a study, and I am not ashamed of what I did there. Though a year before I'd have called it beneath me, I searched his desk. Pride is a luxury, I had finally understood, and Honoria could not afford my luxuries any longer. It took me the better part of an hour. He had been careless. Arrogant men are careless, because carefulness is a kind of fear, and they will not feel fear. I found it at the back of a drawer, folded in with his own letters, not even locked away. A single sheet of good paper. A codicil to the will of Honoria Blackwood. I read it by my shaded candle, with my heart going like a drum. It revoked the bequests. It revoked everything. It left the whole of the estate, the £40,000, the hall, all of it entire and without condition, to Julian Blackwood, and it was dated a fortnight past, and at the foot of it was a signature meant to be Honoria's. But I knew Honoria's hand. I had guided it 100 times. I had watched the way her failing sight made her letters wander and climb, the particular tremor of them, the way she could no longer keep a line. This signature did not wander. It was firm and even and confident, the signature of someone who could see the page. It was a good forgery. It was not good enough for a woman who had held that old hand steady across 100 pages, and below it 2 witnesses had signed. 2 names. I did not know them, but I would come to learn, and you should know it now, that they were not neighbours, not respectable Nettleford men. They were Julian's own creditors' men, brought down from Bristol, signing a lie for a cut of it. I stood in that cold study with the forged paper in my hand, and I understood, at last, the whole shape of the thing, and it was worse than I had let myself imagine. The slander was not the crime. The slander was the tool. Julian had not branded me a fortune hunter because he cared what I was. He had branded me a fortune hunter to expel the one person in that house who could look at his aunt's signature and know it false. He needed me gone, disgraced, disbelieved, driven out before 30 witnesses, so that when the old woman died, as he meant to let her, or hurry her, this paper could surface, and there would be no one left who both knew her hand and could be believed. Who would take the word of the fortune hunter, the mystery girl with no family, the woman 30 guests had watched be exposed at dinner? My word was worth nothing now. He had made sure of it before he ever needed it to be worthless. That was the genius of it, and the horror. I could not go to the neighbours. They thought me a schemer. My accusation would sound like a schemer's revenge. I could not go to the magistrate. The local magistrate dined with the Carraways. I could not even go to Mr. Alcott, dear, honest, dry Mr. Alcott, because Alcott, I knew, though he might believe me, had not the standing nor the spine to stand against a signed codicil and a blood heir and the whole weight of the county's good opinion. A solicitor cannot fight a forgery on the word of a disgraced companion. He would wring his hands and be sorry and do nothing, because there was nothing a man in his place could do. There was only one person in all of England whose word could not be dismissed and could not be bought. One man who could look at a forged testament and end all argument simply by naming it false, because it was his trade, his whole life's trade, to weigh what was true against what was sworn, and to be believed when he gave his verdict. One man before, whom Julian's paper and Julian's Bristol witnesses and Lady Carraway's whispers would all turn to smoke. My father. I had not spoken to him in 3 years. I had left his house in anger and taken my mother's name so that no part of his would cling to me, and I had sworn, I had truly sworn, that I would never need him, never ask him for anything, never stand in front of him wanting. Mr. Justice Cornelius Ashford, of the Western Circuit, and by the strange mercy of the thing, the Western Circuit sat in assize that very month not 2 counties off. I had read his name in the very newspaper I read aloud to Honoria each morning, and had said it flat, and given nothing away, the way I had trained myself to say it. I stood in the dark with the forged paper in my hand, and the whole of my pride rose up one last time and told me there had to be another way, any other way, a way that did not mean swallowing 3 years and walking back to the one door I had sworn shut behind me forever. There was no other way, and it was not, in the end, about my pride at all. It was about an old blind woman asleep down the corridor who had been better to me than my own, whose hand a liar was guiding across papers in the dark, and who had no one left to stand between her and him but me, the one person he had made certain no one would believe. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I sat down at Julian's own desk, at the scene of his crime, and I took a clean sheet, and I began, in the small hours of that terrible night, to write a letter to the father I had sworn I would never need. I sealed the letter with Julian's own wax and carried it out through the scullery door while the house still slept. The night mail passed the Nettleford crossroads at 4. I stood in the wet grass and waited for the lamps of the coach and put the paper into the guard's hand myself. I did not trust it to a salver or a footman. I watched the coach go until it was only a red point in the dark, and then it was gone, and there was nothing left to do but go back and be the woman they thought they had beaten. That was the hardest part. Not the writing. The waiting. I had asked him to come as a judge, not as my father. I had written that plainly, because it was the only way I could write to him at all. I told him what I had found and where I had found it. I told him a blind woman was being robbed by the one man the law would believe over anyone. I did not tell him I was sorry. I did not tell him I had been wrong to leave. Some things I could not put on paper, even to save Honoria. My pride is my father's pride. It is the thing we share most truly, and it is the thing that had kept a whole county between us for 3 years. So I went back inside, and I made myself small. They expected me gone by morning. I was not gone. I came down to the breakfast room in my plain grey dress, and I poured Mrs. Blackwood's tea the way I had poured it for 2 years, and when Julian came in and saw me sitting there, he stopped in the doorway with his cup halfway to his mouth. "You are still here," he said. "Mrs. Blackwood has not dismissed me," I said. "You are not Mrs. Blackwood." His face did something ugly and then smoothed over. He was clever enough not to make a scene in front of the old woman, who sat between us with her clouded eyes turned toward the sound of our voices, not understanding, reaching for my hand under the table. I gave it to her. Her fingers were cold. They were always cold now. "Adelaide, my dear," she said. "Julian tells me there was some unpleasantness at dinner. I was taken up to bed before I could. I don't understand what was said." "Nothing that need trouble you," I told her. "Drink your tea while it is hot." Over her head, Julian looked at me, and I looked back at him, and we both knew. He knew I would not leave. I knew he could not force me without a scene that might reach his aunt's understanding. So we settled into a kind of war conducted entirely in the spaces where she could not see us. He smiled at me across the table. I smiled at him. It was the most frightening breakfast of my life, and Honoria heard only 2 fond voices and was comforted. This is what the strategic silence cost me. I had to let them believe I was cowed. I had to walk through the house with my eyes down and let the servants pity me and let Julian think his season of whispers had done its work. Every hour I did not answer him was an hour the codicil sat in his drawer and an hour closer to whatever he meant to do next. But I had no card to play until my father came, and if my father did not come, I had no card at all. So I endured. I have never been good at enduring. I learnt it that week. The debt was the thing that frightened me most. I had read it in his own papers, £5,000 owed to a Bristol man and 60 days to find it, and better than a month of those days already gone. A man with that much rope around his neck does not wait politely for an old woman to die in her season. He hurries her. I knew it, and I could do nothing but watch, and watching was its own kind of torture. I sat with Honoria in the long afternoons and read to her from the newspaper, and every day I read the assize notices, and every day I looked for the Western Circuit, and found it 2 counties off, and said nothing, and turned the page. The first cycle of that silence nearly broke me on the 3rd day. Julian had gone into Nettleford on some business, to see his creditors' agents, I supposed, the 2 men who had put their names to his forgery. A note came for him while he was out. The footman set it on the hall table with the rest of the post, and I saw the Bristol franc on it, and my whole body went cold. I thought it might be from the money-lender. I thought it might name the sum, or the day, or the thing they meant to do. I stood in the hall with my hand almost on it. I could have taken it. I could have read it, and known. I did not. It was not mine, and if it went missing he would know someone in the house had taken it, and there was only one someone he suspected. So I left it on the salver, and walked away with my heart going like a hammer, and when he came home and read it, his face told me nothing, and I never learned what it said. That was the discipline of that week. To stand within a hand's breadth of the thing you need and not take it, because taking it would betray you. I do not think I have ever wanted anything the way I wanted to open that letter. I let it lie. The second cycle was Lady Carraway, and it was almost worse, because it was cruelty dressed as pity. She came to call on the 5th day, ostensibly to sit with Mrs. Blackwood, truly to inspect the field of her victory. She swept into the morning room in her good furs, and she took both my hands as though we were the dearest friends, and she said, loud enough for Honoria to hear and soft enough to sound kind, "My poor Miss Gray, you must let us find you a respectable place when this is over. It cannot be easy. A girl with no people of her own, no family to write to, no one to take you in. I have said to Julian, whatever her faults, we cannot simply turn her into the road. No family to write to." I held her gaze and I said, "You are very good, Lady Carraway." And inside me the secret sat like a coal, warm and terrible, and I thought, you cannot imagine who I have written to. You have spent a whole autumn deciding what I am. You never once asked. And in a few days a man is going to walk into your county and tell you. And you will remember this morning. And how you held my hands and pitied me for having no one. I said none of it. I twisted my mother's ring on my finger, the little garnet they had called paste, and I smiled at her, and I let her pity me. It was the last morning she ever pitied anyone at Wraycombe Hall. That evening the carriage came up the drive at dusk. I was in the drawing-room when I heard it, the crush of wheels on gravel, the particular rhythm of a hired post-chaise driven hard. Julian was there, and Lady Carraway, who had stayed to dine, and 2 or 3 of the guests who had watched me, branded at the Michaelmas table, and had drifted back to the hall like crows to see how the thing ended. They had gathered, I understood later, to watch me sent off. Julian had told them the companion would be gone by the week's end, and here was the week's end, and here they were, gathered in their evening silks to enjoy it. The footman went to the door. There was a low exchange of voices in the hall. And then the door of the drawing-room opened, and the footman said, in the careful voice servants use for a name above their own, "Mr. Justice Ashford." "Of the Western Circuit." I stood up so fast my chair went back. He came in slowly. He was greyer than I remembered, 3 years greyer and heavier about the eyes, and he carried his court dignity into the room the way he carried it onto the bench, so that without a word being spoken the whole company rose. Even Lady Carraway rose. A judge of assize does not come to a county house unannounced. Every soul in that room knew they were in the presence of the law itself, and not one of them yet knew why he had come. I could not speak. 3 years of things I had sworn I would never say were standing in my throat all at once. He looked at the company. He looked at Julian, whose face had gone the colour of tallow. He looked at Lady Carraway with her mouth still half open, on some gracious welcome she had not finished. And then he crossed the whole length of that room past all of them, and he came to me, and he took my hand in both of his. "I came as soon as I had your letter," he said, quietly only to me, but the room was so silent that every word of it carried. "I have adjourned 2 days of the calendar to do it. I am here at my daughter's request." His daughter. I heard the word go through the room like a stone through ice. I heard Lady Carraway's breath stop. I heard someone, one of the crows, say his, and not finish it. And I stood there with my hand in my father's 2 hands, and I watched 30 years of my own history rearrange itself on 30 faces that had never once bothered to ask. My father was not looking at them. He was looking at my hand. He turned it a little, and with one finger he touched the ring, the small garnet ring on my 3rd finger, and for the first time his voice was not the voice of the bench at all. "You kept it," he said. "Your mother's. She wore it in mourning for her own mother, and I gave it to you when you were 16. I have wondered, these 3 years, whether you had thrown it in the river with the rest of us." "No," I said. My voice came out cracked. "I wore it every day. And that was the thing that undid me. Not the room, not the vindication. It was my father's rough thumb on my mother's ring, and the fact that he had wondered." But there was no time to weep, because Julian had found his tongue. "Sir, my lord," he came forward, and he was smiling, that awful smooth recovering smile. "There has been some. This is a great confusion. This young woman is my aunt's paid companion, Miss Gray. She has, I am sorry to say it before you of all men, quite imposed herself upon a failing old lady. Whatever she has told you, whatever tale of relation, she has told me nothing, my father said, but the truth, which I find I can generally distinguish from the other thing. 30 years' practice." He let go of my hand and turned, at last, to face the room, and I watched him become the judge again, the whole weight of him settling. "You are Julian Blackwood. I have that honour. We shall see what you have," my father said. My daughter's letter made 3 claims: that an estate of £40,000 is being turned from its proper channel by a forged instrument, that the forgery is yours, and that a whole season of slander was manufactured to remove the single person capable of recognizing your aunt's hand. I did not travel 2 counties on a daughter's word alone. A judge does not. I came to look at the paper. "Send for the paper, Mr. Blackwood." The silence then was a live thing. "There is no paper," Julian said. "There is a codicil to Mrs. Blackwood's will, dated a fortnight past, leaving you the entire estate. My daughter describes it in detail. If it does not exist, you have nothing to fear from producing it. If it does exist, and it is honest, you have less. Send for it. I will not be examined in my own aunt's drawing-room like a 'then I shall send for it,' said a new voice, and every head turned. And there in the doorway stood old Mr. Alcott, the solicitor, with his hat still in his hand, for he had come up on the same road behind the judge's chaise, summoned by a line I had added to my letter, begging my father to bring the family lawyer if he could find him. Alcott's face was grey and frightened, and entirely resolved. "I drew Mrs. Blackwood's will, my lord. I have been uneasy about that codicil since the day I first heard it named. I have wanted the standing to speak against it, and I have not had it. I have it now." He looked at Julian. "It is in the back of the left-hand drawer of your study desk, Mr. Blackwood. I saw you put it there. Shall I fetch it, or will you?" Julian looked from the solicitor to the judge to me, and I saw the exact moment the arrogance failed him, the moment he understood that the nameless companion and the half-blind aunt he had been so certain could never threaten him, had, between them, brought the one man in England he could not talk his way past into the middle of his own crime. He bolted for the study. 2 of the gentlemen guests, at a small motion of my father's hand, went after him, and there was a short scuffle in the passage, and when they brought him back the paper was in Alcott's grasp, and Julian's collar was disarranged, and the smoothness was entirely gone from his face. My father took the codicil to the lamp. He asked Alcott for a letter, any letter, in Mrs. Blackwood's true hand, and Honoria's own solicitor produced from his case a note the old lady had written him not 2 months before, in the days when her sight was poor, but her fingers still knew the pen. My father laid the 2 side by side on the table under the lamplight, where all of them could crowd to see, and he did not hurry. "A forger's error," he said at last, mildly, as though instructing a jury, "is that he copies the shape of the letters and forgets the man. Or the woman. Look here. Mrs. Blackwood crosses her T with an upward stroke. So, always, a lifetime's habit. The hand on this codicil crosses downward. Look at the R in her name. In her own letter it is open. Here it is closed. A woman does not change the making of her own name in her 71st year, gentlemen, not when she can barely see the page. This is not her hand. This is a copy of her hand, made by an eye that studied it, and a hand that did not live in it." He straightened, and these 2 witnesses: Thomas Pike, Samuel Grendon, Mr. Alcott. Do you know them? "They are not of this county, my lord." "No," said my father. "They are of Bristol. They are the agents of a moneylender named Cortis, to whom this gentleman owes £5,000, payable within 60 days, of which I am told rather fewer than 30 remain. I had that from an inquiry of my own before I left the circuit town. A man's witnesses to a will ought not to be the very creditors who profit by it. It is a want of delicacy that borders, in law, on something with a longer name. He let the sum lie in the room. £5,000. I watched it land. I watched the guests, who had drawn near to see the papers, draw back now from Julian as though ruin were a thing you could catch by standing close. Lady Carraway took 2 full steps away from him, and her furs whispered, and her face was a wonderful and terrible thing to see, because she had built her whole autumn on this man's expectations, had aimed her own daughter at his £40,000. And it was all turning to smoke in front of her in the lamplight. "This is a felony," my father said. "Forgery of a testament. It happens, Mr. Blackwood, to be triable at the very assize I sit on this week. I have committed men to hard labour for less than what lies on this table." He looked at Julian for a long moment, and then he said the thing I have carried with me ever since, in the driest voice in the world. "You have spent a season deciding what my daughter is. I have spent 30 years deciding what liars are, and I have never once been so sure of a verdict as I am tonight." No one moved. Julian's mouth worked and made no sound, and then he sat down, simply folded down into the nearest chair like a man whose strings had been cut, and put his face in his hands. And the whole edifice of him, the smooth air, the loud accuser, the man who had branded me before 30 people and ordered me gone by morning, came down into a heap in front of the same 30 people. I felt no triumph. I want to be honest about that. I had thought I would. I felt only a great tiredness, and under it a fierce protecting gladness that Honoria was safe. But my father was not finished, and this is the part I had not asked for and did not expect. He turned to Lady Carraway. She had gathered herself. She was reaching, even then, for the manner that had ruled the county for 20 years, the raised chin, the cool little smile. "My lord, I am sure I had no part in any of Mr. Blackwood's private. You asked my daughter, at a public assembly," my father said, "what great family she sprang from." In a voice, I am told, pitched for the room. His eyes on her were perfectly courteous and perfectly cold. "You were so very certain, madam, that you could read a person's blood off their manner. It is a common vanity. I will give you a judge's observation, made without charge. A woman who is quite that sure she can see rank at a glance has usually never once thought to simply ask. You did not ask my daughter who she was. Not once, in a whole season. You decided. It is the cheapest thing a person can do, and you did it loudly, and other people followed you because you were loud. I hope the memory of this evening teaches you to ask." That was all. One speech, no shouting. But I saw it do its work. Lady Carraway had made herself the general of my disgrace before every hostess in 2 counties, and now every one of those hostesses would hear that the fortune hunter she had hunted was a judge's daughter, and that her own girl had been thrown at a forger's neck by her own scheming, and that a justice of the Western Circuit had stood in a drawing-room and told her, gently, that she was a fool. Her standing did not survive that spring. She was not, the following season, in the front pews she had ruled. But that came later. In that room she only stood there with her mouth pressed thin, dented, diminished, saying nothing, because for the first time in her life there was nothing that could be said. And then there was the other one, the guest. I had not forgotten him, though I dare say everyone else had. At the county assembly, when Lady Carraway pressed me, and I answered only a country family, it was this man, a florid gentleman named Fenwick, who fancied his own wit, who had looked at the ring on my hand and said, loud, so the little circle laughed, that the garnet was paste, like her pedigree. 3 words. They had gone into me like a splinter and stayed. He was in the room now. He had crept toward the back of it when the papers came out, hoping, I think, not to be noticed. My father noticed everything. It is his profession. There was a gentleman, he said, not raising his voice, who was heard to say that my daughter's ring was paste. I should like to know which of you it was. The silence stretched, and then Fenwick, because there was nothing else to do, came half a step forward, red to the ears. "Aye, my lord, it was an idle remark, a jest I never. Come and look at it," my father said. The man came. I held out my hand. I confess I did it steadily, and I was glad my hand was steady, and Fenwick bent over the small garnet ring he had mocked before a laughing circle, and my father said, "That ring belonged to my late wife. She wore it in mourning for her mother, and I set it on my daughter's hand when the child was 16. It is not paste. It never was. You looked at a true thing and called it false, because it suited the company to laugh. That is, in miniature, the whole of what has been done to this young woman all autumn." He inclined his head, terribly polite. "You may apologize to her now, if you wish." "I, miss? My lady, I most humbly beg your—" The words fell out of him in a heap. "Thank you, miss," Fenwick, I said. I did not warm it. I have wondered since whether I should have. But I had poured Honoria's tea below the salt while this man laughed, and I found I could give him the words back and nothing more. He retreated to the back of the room and was very quiet. It was only then, in the aftermath of all of it, that they brought Mrs. Blackwood down. She had heard the carriage, heard the raised voices carry up the stairs, and she had made her woman bring her down, and she stood in the doorway, on her maid's arm, with her clouded eyes going toward the sound of me. "Adelaide? What is all this? They keep telling me things, and none of them will speak plainly. Is it true? What they are saying about Julian, is it true?" I went to her. I took her cold hands. And my father, who had put a man to the floor with 3 sentences not a minute before, came and stood by us and told her, gently, plainly, the way you tell terrible news to someone who cannot see your face, exactly what her nephew had done and who had witnessed it, and what the papers on the table were. He left nothing out, and he softened nothing that mattered, and he did not once make it worse than it was. She listened. Her hands trembled in mine, and when he had finished she was quiet a long moment, and then she said, "And Adelaide she is your daughter. You are the judge, the one she never speaks of." "I am," said my father. 2 years, Honoria said. 2 years she has read to me and walked with me and refused the extra wages I pressed on her, and she never told me she was anybody at all." Her blind eyes filled. "She let me love her for herself. Do you know how rare that is, sir? At my age, with my money, to be loved by someone who wants nothing?" She turned her face to me. "You foolish, proud, dear girl. Julian I can almost forgive. God help me, for he was frightened and weak. But you frightened me tonight, letting them say those things and never once." "I am sorry you were frightened," I said. "That was all I could manage. That is the only part of any of it I am sorry for. That you were frightened, and I could not tell you why." She took my hand and held it before all of them, the whole room, the same 30 faces that had watched Julian brand me a fortune hunter and had believed him, and she held my hand and would not let it go. And that, more than my father's verdict, more than Julian broken in his chair, more than Lady Carraway dented against the wall, that was the moment the room's judgment of me turned entirely over. Not because a great man had claimed me. Because a good old woman, who could not see my face at all, had known me best of any of them, and said so, and would not let go of my hand. Julian was taken away that night. My father, who had authority enough for it, saw him held to answer at the assize, and there is little sweetness in what came after for him, so I will give it to you shortly, the way I have given it to myself. He was tried. Not before my father. A judge does not sit on the case of the man who wronged his own child, and mine was scrupulous in that above all things. But before another of the circuit, on the evidence my father had laid bare in that drawing-room. The forgery was plain. The Bristol men, when it came to it, were quick enough to save their own necks by telling the truth of who had hired them. Julian went to the courts and then to the mercy of his creditors, who had none, and the last I heard of him, he was a long way from Somerset and from any drawing-room that would have him. I do not gloat. I only note that the debt he forged a will to escape swallowed him in the end anyway, 60 days or no. Some sums come due whatever a man signs. That is nearly all of it. But not quite. There is the ending, and the ending is the part I most want you to have, because it is the answer to the thing they never asked me. It is a year on now. A spring morning, the true beginning of it, with the light coming gold and slantwise across the physic garden at Wraycombe, and the box hedges wet, and the first of the year's bees in the rosemary. Honoria sits on the stone bench in her shawl, with her face turned up to the warmth, and I read to her, in good light, from a book, the newspaper set aside, and her sight is no better, and never will be, but her hand on my arm is warm now, not cold, because she is not afraid any more. The house is quiet in the good way. There is no one in it who means her harm. My father comes when the circuit brings him near. He came a fortnight past, and we took tea on the terrace, the three of us. And it was the most ordinary thing in the world, and that is exactly why it was such a wonder. 3 years of silence do not close with a grand speech. Ours closed over a teapot and a plate of seed cake, and my father asking Honoria's opinion of the roses, and Honoria giving it at length, and my father listening as though he had nothing in the world to do but listen. We have not spoken much of the quarrel that put the silence there. We do not need to. Both of us know it was the same fault in both of us, the same iron, and both of us know we have laid it down. I will tell you only that it was never about money, ours, and never about disgrace. It was about 2 proud people who each waited 3 years for the other to bend first, and a blind old woman, and a forged paper that finally made one of us stop waiting. I am glad it was me. I would not have chosen to learn it so, but I am glad it was me. And there is the will, the true one. Honoria had Mr. Alcott draw it fresh, in her own true hand as far as her fingers could manage, and his pen for the rest, witnessed honestly before honest men. She left the greater part of the estate, the hall, the land, near the whole of the £40,000, to found a county infirmary at Nettleford, for the people who have no one, because she said that was the use she wanted her husband's money put to when she was gone, and no nephew's neck to save with it, and to me she left a legacy. A modest one, she called it, though it was more than modest, more than a companion could dream of. I declined the greater part of it. I want that on the record, because it is the whole answer to the whole business. They called me a fortune hunter. They said it below the salt and across the assembly floor and at the head of a table before 30 people, that I had wormed my way into a lonely old woman's affections to strip her estate. And when the estate was, in truth and in law, laid open before me, when a good woman pressed the greater share of £40,000 into my hands and begged me to take it, I would not. I sat with Honoria and Mr. Alcott, and I asked that the larger bequest go to the infirmary with the rest, and I kept only a small thing, enough and no more, and the little garnet ring I already had. Not because I am a saint, I am not, but because I had spent a season being told what I was by people who never asked, and I found that I wanted, more than I wanted any money on earth, for the record to say plainly what I was not. Let it stand in a solicitor's strong-box in Nettleford. The fortune hunter, when handed the fortune, gave it back. As for the others, I see them only at a distance now, and only rarely. Julian I have already told you of, gone to the courts and his creditors, and neither merciful. Lady Carraway I saw once, in Nettleford, on the far side of the market square, and she did not cross to speak, and I did not, and she is no longer where she used to sit in the county's front pews. The whispers she generated turned, in the end, and whispered about her. I take no pleasure in it. I only observe that she spent her life certain she could read a person's worth at a glance, and she was wrong about me in every particular, loudly, and the county remembered. I have thought a great deal, this quiet year, about how nearly it all went the other way. If I had left by morning as I was told. If my pride had won the last argument and kept me from the desk and the letter. If the Western Circuit had sat one county further off. A blind woman would have been robbed and worse, and no one would ever have known, because the one witness who could have spoken had been branded a liar in advance, so cleverly, before she even knew there was a crime. That is the thing that stays with me, not the vindication. How close the dark came to winning simply because a room had already decided who to believe. So here is what I know now that I did not know when they lifted my card and set it below the salt. A room can pass its verdict on you in a single evening. It can do it over the soup, with a raised voice and a knowing smile, and 30 people will nod, and it will feel as final as anything on this earth. But the true verdict, the one that holds, that one takes a season to be read. It waits in the back of a drawer. It travels 2 counties by the night mail. It comes in the shape of the very thing you swore you would never need. And when it is read out at last, in good light, by someone who actually troubled to look, it does not shout. It does not need to. Honoria has fallen asleep in the sun, with her face still turned toward my voice. I will let her sleep. The bees are in the rosemary, and my father comes again next month, and the ring is warm on my finger, and I was never, not for 1 hour of my life, hunting anything but a place where I could be known for myself. I found it in the last house I looked, wearing a plain name, pouring tea for a woman who could not see me and knew me anyway. Tell me the town you are watching from. I should like to know how far Adelaide's story has travelled.